Hello and welcome back to a hastily arranged Red Tinted Glasses episode. It's myself, Glenn, and Phil on the podcast tonight. And Phil, we've scrambled ourselves on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, and just 15 minutes ago, the Dons have released the statement announcing the sacking of Jimmy Thelin. I guess we'll start with your initial reaction.
Um, it's a weird one. I know in the episode the other day, I was saying I kind of didn't care whether he went or whether he stayed, but I'm gutted. I think we're maybe kind of expecting it, but maybe not as soon as now. And I think on the back of the Falkirk game yesterday, I think it's just left me feeling, yeah, I feel gutted that it's kind of ended this way. I feel like he probably deserved a little bit more dignity than a leak in the daily record, and deserved a bit more on the pitch yesterday. But that's potentially for another episode. But yeah, I'm gutted he's away.
I mean, deserved more on the pitch, and maybe we have to start looking at the players for that. But I think, the timing is maybe slightly surprising, but also slightly fitting, you could argue, given it's occurred at the start of the January transfer window, because certainly the habit has been for us to get rid of the manager towards the end of the January transfer window. But of course, now this means it's the start of our search for our sixth manager in just 5 years, so that the merry-go-round kind of begins, I guess. And I think we should really probably start by saying, whatever your opinion is on Jimmy in or Jimmy out, you're obviously sitting there with your Feeling It t-shirt on as well in a final show of solidarity, we'll forever be grateful for him for the memories produced in May of last year, winning that Scottish Cup, and he's going to be etched into our history of this club forever. Just unfortunately, that domestic form from about November had totally tailed off and never fully recovered. And yeah, the writings felt like it's been on the walls. But yesterday's defeat to Falkirk obviously was the final straw.
Yeah, I mean, we've already spoken just before we came live about the strange inclusion of a comment from Jimmy in the statement about his sacking, which will be interesting to see whether that's a regular at other clubs. It's not one that either of us have ever recalled being included in a Dons one. But he alluded to the fact it's a results-based business. I think everybody knows, if you go on the run that sort of we've been for the last wee while, your card's kind of marked almost. Like you say, I think it's probably good that we've sacked him this early. If that's what the board's, if that's the decision they've come to, that's what they want to do. I'm glad they've not kind of pussyfooted around it. And, as you say, wait until the end of the month, and then we're in this horrible limbo where we can't bring in players, and you've kind of just got an interim to piece together things. So hopefully Lutz had already been working on a list if that was the case, and it's not going to take too long for us to find a replacement. But it's, for me, it's just got huge shades to the way that Glass went, Goodwin went, Robson went. It just feels like a carbon copy. And like you say, looking for our sixth manager now, it's strange considering how consistent we had been in terms of lengthy spells of management under the likes of Calderwood, Brown, McInnes. They all got a decent little run at it. So yeah, it's a strange one.
I was wondering what you were going to say there. We were certainly going for managers having longer period until Dave Cormack came in to town, but I'm sure that's purely coincidental. Obviously, the news has kind of only just been confirmed in the last 15, 20 minutes by the club officially. The Daily Record broke the story here in Scotland. It was first broken over in Sweden. As David McLennan points out, apparently Jimmy leaving was announced on a Swedish website before the club got its act together. Well, that rarely comes as a surprise. The club always seems like it's behind the eight ball in these things, but also news kind of coming out of Sweden that actually looks like Jimmy's potentially going to take a job over there. I know in the last episode I touted him for the actual national team job in the summer, but it looks like a potential return to club football in Sweden awaits for Jimmy. So yes, a sacking, but again, we've spoken on this show before about him handing in his resignation and the club turning it down. Potentially that was another thing last night, whether the club accepted it or not, but it certainly seems from the statement that it is Actually, the statement's kind of weird. It does feel almost like a mutual agreement that the time's right, but probably fitting when he's got another job lined up.
Yeah, absolutely. And if that rumor is true that he's off to, I believe it's AEK, he's going to a club with big pedigree in Sweden. Obviously, his family's still back there as well. So I don't think anyone would really be surprised or fault him if that's the decision that he wanted to take that job, and the club seen it as the best way to effectively part ways with him in a mutual manner.
Yeah, if we run through the statement quickly, obviously the club highlighting last season, and then both results and performances have fallen below the required standard this season and have not been commensurate with the level of investment made in first team squad and footballing operation. Jimmy will depart the club alongside his assistant Christer Persson. First team coach Peter Leven will take temporary charge of first team affairs, obviously starting with that trip to Ibrox on Tuesday. He'll be supported by Craig Hinchcliffe, who's the goalkeeping coach, and sporting director Lutz Pfannenstiel. By that, I kind of seem to feel like Lutz will be in the dugout. Lutz will also lead the process to appoint the club's next permanent manager. Are you surprised maybe to see the sporting director in the dugout or acting as one of the coaching staff? Maybe not
Yeah,
uncommon in places like Germany, but certainly
yeah.
over
It
here.
seems a bit strange for us. It would almost be like Gunn stepping in and then in the interim before Thielen took over. And I said before, it kind of gives shades of Craig Levine. He's the sporting director who's also appointed himself to the dugout job as well. So I'll be interested to see whether he just decides to give himself the job on a permanent as well. But yeah, a strange one. I feel like it's kind of been that weird downward spiral since Amir left. That's another
Mm,
conspiracy that we can all go into. So I feel like we're probably not really, outside of leaving, probably blessed with the greatest backroom staff in the world at the moment. So it'll be
mhm.
interesting to see exactly how that coaching setup does come out on Tuesday
Yeah.
against Rangers.
And I suppose again, going back to the statement, it just states that Peter will be in temporary charge. Now that doesn't put any length of time on how long that is. Could you see him keeping that till the end of the season? Would that be preferred, or do you think it's imperative that we get the next permanent manager in ASAP so that they can see who they've got, to work with? Because this could be a blessing in disguise for players like Leighton Clarkson, whose future looked set to be elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ideal scenario for everyone is that you want your new manager in as soon as possible for the exact reasons you said. You want them to be able to get a feel for the squad. If they are in the position where there's not going to be many incomings, you want them to have as much time, to figure out how these players will work with their, style of play, with, their systems, if we want to go back to that, and sort of see where the gaps are going into summer. But at the same time, you also, don't just want to take the cheap and easy first option potentially. As we did last time around with Jimmy, we took our time. We made sure we got the man that we wanted to get in charge. We don't want a repeat of a Warnock situation where we're kind of going for that, an attempted quick fix. So if Peter is in charge, longer than whatever is deemed as a temporary period, I don't think anyone will really complain just with his efforts last time around. But at the same time, you don't really want to get into a Robson repeat where he kind of does so well, you're forced to give him the job on a permanent, and maybe he's not quite ready for it yet. I know that a couple of seasons ago at Player of the Year, he said that himself when I stopped him for a very inebriated chat about the limbs at Hampden with the Celtic game. So he said himself he felt like he wasn't ready to step up and be a permanent Aberdeen manager. So it'll be interesting to see what way the club goes. I've seen names bandied around on social media already, but it's always hard to tell, who are the attractive sort of suitor for potential managers.
Yeah. On leaving, are you maybe surprised that he's been put in temporary charge? Obviously we spoke last time about the Angus MacDonald article, and some people have also leveled criticism at Peter leaving, that he's just as much as part of the problem with performances and results, given he's part of the coaching staff. So is it maybe a surprise that he also hasn't been shown the door?
I don't think it's a surprise that he's not been shown the door. I mean, we've all kind of said he was almost being groomed to be a future Aberdeen manager. The last couple of interim spells. I think it's probably more of a surprise he's still here and not coaching elsewhere. Obviously, a couple of jobs have come up in the Championship. Obviously, the Kilmarnock job as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably more surprised that he's not, been in contact with any of them to take their jobs on a permanent basis. But I don't think it's a surprise he's still here. Like I say, he's kind of, you still have somebody who has been amongst this squad for the best part of 3 seasons, 4 seasons. That he knows the players. The players will probably have some level of respect potentially for him off the bat. And it seems like the sensible option at the moment.
And as well, with losing the manager during the January transfer window, that always creates an awkward feel, I suppose, for players both currently here and maybe looking inwards towards Aberdeen as well. IW9750 in the comments saying, wonder if it'll be a quick appointment, awkward timing with that transfer window open, might put players off having no manager. And do you think, obviously now with that uncertainty currently around who will come in and how long it may take to make that appointment, it could affect our January transfer business? Of course, current outgoings, Alfie Dorrington left the club today. He's been recalled by Spurs. Could Jesper Karlsson return to Bologna now that Jimmy's not here as well? So even some of the players currently here on loans, we could see leave the club as well.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely springs up, a lot of potential issues. I mean, we've been a little bit, I suppose, dodgy for the past wee while. As you say, we've kind of been in this cycle of good performance, bad run, manager sacked for the last little bit. That instability potentially might put a lot of players off. I think our form as well this season. A lot of players are maybe thinking, do I really want to come in and have to pull my socks up and really work hard? Or do I want to have a sort of easy out, get better money somewhere down south where I can kind of coast through? Albeit a lot of these players seem to be coasting through without blame as is. So I think it will potentially put a little bit of a spanner in the works for our January, ambitions.
Yeah, and kind of on that, Graham Gibb pointing out, at times of poor performances, it's easy to just suggest clearing out the coaches and gut the squad, but that's totally impractical. We need to minimise the impact of a managerial change, and as I said, obviously this could now affect those potential outgoings. Potentially even the likes of Kusini Yengi might suddenly get a future at Aberdeen alongside Leighton Clarkson. How do we go about minimising that impact that this managerial change will bring about? We've got a big game coming up on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of starts with the fact that Leaving is in charge. It gives us that small level of continuity within the squad. Whether he's able to just knuckle down on a consistent core 8 or 9 players. I know that was partly one of the criticisms that was leveled at Jimmy, was that he couldn't quite pick a solid starting 11 that he was happy with. If Peter's able to sort of knuckle down a real core nucleus of that squad that goes unchanged for however many matches he's in charge with, again, it kind of just all comes down to giving us that continuity and consistency, which maybe limits, as I've already said, the instability that comes with sacking a manager. And in doing that, if we do pick up results, it maybe makes us seem a little bit more attractive to whoever's coming in and gives them a greater idea of, okay, these are the players that are going to work hard. These are the players that are pulling out performances, and it gives them a sort of, starting block to make their pitch to the club as to why they should be in charge.
And also they've got to be willing to work alongside Lutz, or certainly in that model of reporting to the sporting director, and can't be bothered suggests, could it be that we're looking for a coach rather than a manager? And certainly going by the club statement, it looks like we're trying to appoint the next permanent manager, not a permanent coach or head coach. But do you think that's a possibility at all?
It could well be. I know there's been a little bit of discourse today, obviously on the back of Ruben Amorim's comments as well at Man United, saying he was hired to be a manager, not a coach. So for me, it's all very modern semantics. You're the number one in the dugout. It's your job at the end of the day. But I think it'll be interesting to see where we're looking. Obviously, I know that Asku's been mentioned mainly, in the comments here tonight, but also across social media. I think he would be my preference from inside of Scotland. But it'd be interesting to see whether, as you say, we're looking for managers that maybe worked under that sporting director model a bit more across Europe. I think the concern for me there is, are we going to be in the same position? Are we going to get a manager whose family doesn't move with him? Is it going to take the same sort of length of time as it took Jimmy, to get him into the role as well? And I think time's not really something we have at the moment, I think, just with our situation. So I think it'll be really interesting and slightly daunting with what direction we go. I've already seen in the comments the usual managerial merry-go-round mentioned by Dave McLennan. So I'm looking forward to PLZ, touting Malky Mackay, Stephen Robinson and Neil Lennon for the job.
Well, of course, as Ross Duncan actually pointed out, the rushed appointment would be Stephen Robinson from St Mirren. I think Johnny's also messaged me saying that as well. Hopefully, though, David McLennan saying we're not getting a new manager bounce, we'll leave in. Hopefully we do, and that would be a perfect start to life under him again on Tuesday. I'm going to throw this one to you, since I know how easily you can offend the leader of the Nicky Devlin fan club. But Ross Duncan posing the question: do we pull the likes of Graham Shinnie or Nicky Devlin into the coaching staff? Actually, it'll be interesting. I'll pose this back to Ross as well. Does he mean now under Peter leaving, or when we get a new appointment? Because certainly based on the performance yesterday, we could maybe be seeing the last season for certainly Graham Shinnie.
Yeah, I don't know whether they get pulled into the coaching staff at present. I mean, I mentioned it on my own social media. I think the so-called leaders within the dressing room, that being the likes of Shinnie, Devlin, you're potentially looking at Meathoff, Armstrong within that category as well. They've got a lot to answer for. I've said already, this feels like a carbon copy of Glass, Goodwin, Robson. I feel like there's a lot of players that are maybe shirking away from the responsibility. They talk a lot they talk a lot in the media, talk a good game, and, we're yet to see it on the pitch. I don't know whether including them in the coaching staff would make the dressing room any more of a positive place. Again, I know I've already mentioned that you're looking at the potential respect levels right off the bat, which would, maybe benefit us. But I just feel like they're potentially part of the problem as to how it's gotten to this stage, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I know you're not singling out those two players individually as being part of the problem. I think it's the wider playing group are part of the problem. And I think Jimmy's final post-match interview on the club channel and Sports Sound were pretty much summing up not only how he clearly felt, but also some of us in the fan base felt. He mentioned the word egos and players needing to put their egos to one side and kind of take a long, hard look at themselves. You've mentioned it there, that the senior players need to do that, but now more than ever, they need to take responsibility, because, as I said, this is our sixth manager in 5 years. The likes of Shinnie's seen them all. Devlin's certainly seen a few as well, but you've got even Stuart Armstrong in there that's more than experienced. Meathoff, I would count as a senior player as well. Could you argue on Knooster as being a senior player? Certainly Nielsen. I know he's come in under Jimmy Thelin, but there are players there that should be more than stepping up, either grabbing the game by the scruff of the neck or grabbing each other and, wisening up, really.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating, I think, from a fan perspective. And again, I think it's partly just the way that modern football is. I feel like players are kind of above their station these days. We could argue they've maybe got too much power in terms of, decisions that are being made at the club, how they can influence, players around them, and almost effectively, I'm not saying this was the case for Aberdeen, but effectively down tools. I mean, it certainly felt like that at times on Saturday anyway. And really, they're getting paid a good wage. They've got to show a level of professionalism, and they've just got to go out and play for the team, for the manager, for the fans. And I feel, looking through that entire squad, I think the egos comment from both Thielen and Shinnie as well, I think had made a similar comment, was spot on. I think we see it, week on week that there's players that really do have an ego and a mentality issue. And, there's only so much of the blame can be shouldered on Jimmy. I appreciate that tactically at times we did look a little bit all over the place. The results weren't great. But, it's not him that's out in the park. The players do have to take a level of responsibility there. And I feel like, as has been mentioned already tonight, clearing out the coach is often the quick and easy solution. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like that's going to be a fix for this team.
It's probably not. And as John Keel points out as well, it comes to a point when it's cheaper paying off the manager than paying off 10 players. But what manager comes in? And actually, we've mentioned Neil Warnock's name on the podcast already. And he pointed out that our problems went far deeper. And, does he mean in the dressing room? Does he mean deeper in terms of the boardroom? Certainly, again, I do feel players, and it'll be interesting to see. Well, I suspect Graham Shinnie will be fronted up to the media on probably, they've said Cormac Park shut tomorrow because of the weather, so probably be virtual press conferences, but it'll be interesting to see what players put up in front of the media tomorrow for the pre-match duties. But one would suspect it'd be the club captain, or certainly one of the more senior players to come out, and I'm sure they'll apologise to Jimmy like they usually do when a manager loses their job. And we'll get the usual, we know we need to do better. But again, I'm sick and tired of hearing it from the players. You mentioned it with Nicky Devlin saying that ahead of the Falkirk game. I just now am at the point where I want to see it on the pitch. Let's get back out there under Peter Leven and start doing that talking on the pitch. I was on Sportsound last night as well, speaking about the situation, and it felt like it was going to be a double-edged sword last night. But Tom English and myself were discussing the 3-year project, obviously the tag that was branded on Jimmy when he came in. And when this news tonight was first breaking, Niamh messaged and said, we aren't the club to experiment a 3-year project on. Do you think that tag was always a hindrance to Jimmy, because we were never seeing improvement and the club kept, backing it? We have to stick with that project. Any other manager's never been given almost a timeline to improve the squad.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a blessing and a curse. Early doors, it kind of gave them that buffer zone where, people's expectations were that it was going to take time. But I think still branding the project as a 3-year project on the back of a Scottish Cup win in group stage qualification for Europe, I think it almost felt like that could be used as a deflection tactic from the club when things were going poorly. I think on the back of that, we probably should have shifted our priorities a little bit and sort of said, okay, we've done better than expected. Let's look to ramp this up a little bit. And it really did hinder us when it obviously came to our recruitment aspect. We've signed a young team. You're expecting a manager to get the best out of that young team and be competitive right off the bat. It was never going to happen. There's very few managers that we could look at just now to get in with that current, whatever I said it was on the last episode, about 20, 24 and a bit average age of the squad, and expect them to hit the ground running. You sign kids, you're going to get kids' expectations. I think that's just the way it works.
Do we need to then go down an experienced route for the next appointment?
Potentially. I think it really depends. Again, I don't quite know what Lutz's ambitions are when it comes to his role as a sporting director, whether he's, again, is one that sees this as a long-term project, or whether he is expected to obviously hit the ground running and have us as a competitive, effectively back to that third, potentially title winning force, based on how this season has gone. It'll be really interesting. I know that we were joking in one of my group chats about getting some German that retired from football at 23 years old and has been coaching ever since. A proper Fabian Hertzler type from Brighton, to maybe come in and get us firing. Or, again, it could be the case that we look at someone that's potentially been around the block a little bit in Europe, has worked under similar systems, and
Mhm.
has that level of pedigree. And again, I think it comes back to that respect aspect. I think a lot of these players could do with, getting their egos in check and their priorities in line, and it maybe is someone that's, got a little bit of that pedigree that can do so.
Yeah. We'll maybe come on to some of the names that are being mentioned already tonight, and I'm sure will be banded around and thrown into the ring. As you've already said, I'm sure PLZ will be doing the usual job for the boys shout as well. But on the deflection chat that you mentioned there, I think it's very much fair. And I think, had he not won the Scottish Cup, probably wouldn't have been in the job as long. I think he was always going to get the benefit of the European Cup competitions because he'd earned it really by winning the Scottish Cup. Yeah, he got the worst possible draw statistically. I do think we left a bit out there on the European stage and didn't perform to the fullest of our potential. Unfortunately, once we exited the European competition, the domestic form hasn't picked up. We've only picked up that point against Dundee United since exiting Europe. So, and I think I said there's only 2 goals that we've scored since then as well. So, not exactly stuff to write home again about. But we're now going into quite a big double header, sitting in 8th in the table. And when we sacked Barry Robson, the club had came out and said being 8th was seen as unacceptable. Similar sort of stage of the season. So really, he kind of fell on his own sword in the end, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the club have set their level of expectation. I entirely appreciate that. Again, like I said, it's a results-based business. The club will have a certain level that it expects us to play at. I think us as fans have a certain level we expect us to play at, and I think all of us, even myself, who's probably being a bit more vocal in my defence of Jimmy, appreciate that the situation we're in was abysmal.
Mhm.
I think just from my perspective, it's so difficult to see where we go from here. I mean, we've got it on the banner running across, the bottom of the screen here for those that are watching on YouTube. 6th manager in 5 years. It feels farcical. We're not going to be a club that can compete if we're not at any level consistent, within the managerial staff or the playing staff. It's it just becomes really, really difficult to establish yourself at this rate.
Yeah, and again, there's some names being banded about in the comments. I'm sure we'll come on to them shortly. But there was a comment from Sarah Ferguson, and this is maybe more pertinent to Peter Leven's time in charge, but potentially also the next incoming manager. She says, "I want to see a solid starting 11. Being honest, week on week, I was sick of seeing a different team being put out." And I think we've discussed it, the fact that our number 9 effectively was changing week in, week out. We went back to a change of formation against Falkirk with that back 4. We've never seen really, actually in most of Jimmy's time, a consistent week in, week out, same starting 11. And that must be difficult for players, let alone manager alike.
Yeah, again, like I've said already, it comes back to stability that's required. And we joked about it most episodes, the Jimmy
Yeah.
Tombola when it came to a starting lineup. I don't think anyone could guess most weeks where we were going to go with that. And I think we do, again, like I said, with Peter coming in, we do need to kind of get at least that 8 or 9 core nucleus down. Everyone appreciates that teams have to be rotated for various reasons. Maybe not so much now we're not in Europe, but injuries and just general fatigue do play a factor. And I think across the board we need that stability. Especially going into, well, effectively now it feels like we're almost just looking ahead to next season at this rate. Until we sort of start figuring out the direction the club's wanting to go with the next appointment, it kind of feels like, I don't know, I guess if it's just my misery off the back of Saturday and Jimmy being sacked, it kind of feels like we're almost in a rebuild mode once more. And it's kind of hard to get behind as a fan.
It's really interesting you saying that as well, because there's still a lot to be played for this season. The league is tight. I think I said last night, almost feels that top 4 is out of reach, and I think everyone said top 6 feels out of reach, let alone the top 4, and potentially even 5th with how well Hibs are going currently. So we're fighting, and I think this shows us how far we've fallen, is that we're fighting right now with Falkirk and Dundee United, potentially Dundee if they continue to get their act together, for that final top six space. And it's imperative that we finish within the top six this season, not just for the financial benefits, but of course, if we can then kick on and scrape into fifth again. And yes, again, I know it's disappointing to hear as an Aberdeen fan speaking about us scraping into fifth, but it would hold a European place potentially. But of course, we're still in the Scottish Cup. We've got the defence of that to start. What's that, a week on Saturday or Sunday? I don't know, I've forgotten when that game is, but the defence of that trophy starts, and we want to retain that trophy as well. So there still feels there's stuff still to play for this season. We can't just chuck the rest of this season.
No, I mean there's absolutely stuff to play for. It just feels like from a playing perspective, they've almost chucked it already. Especially on the back of Saturday, there was just such a lack of interest on that pitch that, really made everybody feel a lack of interest in the stands. And I think like you say, the money aspect's the big thing. And I think especially looking towards trying to get a new coach in, we spoke on the last episode about, where does our player trading model go from here? Are we going to have viable income-ins? Obviously, depends on the package that's associated with Jimmy leaving. Is it a case of he's got a new job, they've paid out his contract, happy days, or has there been some sort of severance agreed? That's another outgoing fee. We're going to have January incomings coming in. So it's sort of, it makes it tough when you're looking towards, who we're going to realistically be able to go for. And again, I think it's something that everyone's in agreement with. We've kind of got to throw money at a manager here. We can't sit and just hope that Peter's going to happily take this on temporary until the end of the season, then just get turfed out come May. I don't know.
You then run the risk, as you've already mentioned, us doing well under Peter, potentially retaining the Scottish Cup under him, or achieving a top 5-4 position. If Hearts or Motherwell have an extreme fall off, then what do you do? Do you dismiss what he's done, or do you do what we did with Barry Robson and end up giving him the job? It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Paul Donaldson, who's watching along, as tends to do with our lives, good to have you along, Paul. Previous comment when we came live, I noticed he mentioned the scenes at full time. I know you were there as well yesterday, Phil. He said the away end was quite toxic, and it almost had that sense of inevitability that the time was up for Jimmy. But his more recent comment was that we need a manager with a proven track record in Scottish football. There aren't that many managers who fit that bill. Bringing in a foreign manager with no experience in Scotland is too much of a risk. And I guess that kind of comes on to our point about chucking the rest of the season or not. Is bringing in someone with little to no experience of Scottish football too much of a risk at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look around the league, obviously Celtic faltering a little bit is maybe an understatement under Wilfred Nancy. Our sort of track record at the moment under Jimmy, not the greatest. St Johnstone obviously struggled in their season in the Premiership with Simo Valakari, but obviously flying high in the Championship now. But, you then look at Motherwell, you look at ourselves, that first run that we had under Jimmy, and obviously leading us to the Scottish Cup as well. It's always going to be the high risk, high reward situation in Scottish football. I think that's just the way the league kind of is. It is, for the most part, somewhat behind the times compared to other leagues in the world. We're showing signs of catching up with that now, but it's always going to be a risk appointing a manager from abroad. And as I even said earlier, it's that risk of having to wait 2-3 months for them to come into the role. But at the same time, the managers that we're realistically looking at that have got the experience of Scottish football, I don't think many probably inspire much amongst the fan base. But we're in that same catch-22 as we were last time before appointing Jimmy. A lot of the names that were getting bandied around, folks kind of thought, well, we're just going to be back to the same old Curtis Main up front and we're going to play hoofball. So again, I think it comes down to Lutz, and he's kind of holding, I suppose, the keys at the moment to the direction that we want to go in. And I think it would be quite interesting, if Red TV maybe put out another sit-down interview with him to to kind of gauge that perspective. And I think it's one of the things us
That
as
would be
fans.
far too much common sense for this club.
Well, exactly. I think it's one thing as fans. We heard it before from Cormac Burrows, etc., as the transparency. And I think right now transparency is needed more than ever.
Absolutely, but on Cormac, again, a lot of people in the comments stating about whether or not they trust Dave to make the next appointment, and I think it's very clever from the club / Dave to highlight that it'll be Lutz leading the search for the next manager, probably putting all the pressure and responsibility onto his shoulders, meaning that if it goes wrong, he can maybe, diminish any responsibility of the appointment, given his current track record of appointing managers hasn't exactly been glowing.
Yeah, and we spoke about it on the last episode, and it's all fallen into place. It's becoming a very high pressure January for Lutz, and what really is his first sort of test as sporting director. Not only is he responsible now for the search for a manager, he's responsible for the search for new players. Potentially where any outgoings may be.
Yeah,
most likely now in charge of potential contract renewals for players that are out of deal in the summer. It's becoming a very, very high stakes month for him, and I think you're right in saying that Dave probably has been quite wise in almost shifting that burden onto him. So if in 18 months' time we're sacking our 7th manager in 6 years, then we can see where the ball squarely lies.
Yeah, no, he's not silly as Dave, I'll tell you that.
No.
Right, let's get to some comments, because there's been a lot of interactions here on the show tonight. Lots of you tuning in on this cold Sunday evening that's certainly been warmed up by that statement produced from the club announcing Jimmy Thelin has been sacked as current Aberdeen manager. So before we get into the chat of potential names or who we maybe would like to see, Phil, we'll go through some of the comments. Can't be bothered saying, seriously though, what happens now during the window? Who do we sign or let go? Because the next manager will want to have his own ideas. Again, we've already discussed that, and I think you make an excellent point, Phil, as well, about contract extensions. Dante Polvara being one. I know we've got some of the young guys in the squad whose contracts are up as well. Can Vinny Bizowen finally find a manager that works for him? Of course, his contract up in the season, end of this season as well. Robert Forsyth saying he gave up on him weeks ago. How could he leave Clarkson sitting on the bench while we were delivering the most god-awful football? Was his final line, thanks for the memories, but he had to go. This one here saying, gutted by the outcome, but 100% the correct decision. Forever grateful to Jimmy for giving me the best day of my life. An Aberdeen legend in my eyes, wishing him nothing but success. Definitely feels like one that Jimmy Thelin will have legend banded about far too easily. I know a few of the older guys also will say that as well. Dave McLennan, some of your comments already been shown already, but saying the players need to take an enormous amount of responsibility, but it's easier to fire a manager. Kind of always seems to be that way. And John Kelo saying that in his presser yesterday was very much from a man on the way out as well. Scottish Crypto wanting the Motherwell manager, saying would be fantastic but unlikely. No MLS managers, please. Yeah, I think that goes without saying.
That's really without Phil Neville then.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm trying to think who else is potentially doing well over there, but I would mean I have to pay attention to anyone other than Christian Ramirez in the MLS. Again, a comment here from Robert1989. Can we trust Cormac to get the appointment right? He's not got one manager appointment right so far. Again, we've just discussed that there, which is probably why we see Lutz getting the branding of that as well. Colin Gale coming out with a suggestion for a new manager. He likes Michael Skubala at Lincoln City. They were impressive 5-2 winners today. And I think currently sit top of League One with the opportunity to get promoted to the Championship. I'm sure trying to take him away from Lincoln would be a tough challenge, but maybe appealing if we could actually get our European ambitions back on track as well. And Ross Duncan saying the rushed appointment would be Stephen Robinson from St Mirren. So Phil, we're in early days. Bob Duff saying that Robinson would be an awful appointment as well. where do you lie in the probably less than 2 hours off the back of this news breaking? Any names you want to throw out there? Any suggestions you definitely don't want?
Yeah, I mean, I think the likes that the shouts of Robson and co are probably the ones that I'm not too up for. As I've said already, it's that sort of, merry-go-round of Scottish managers. I think would be back to, and I don't think we've got a squad that would suit how he would want to play anyway. I don't think we're physical enough. I don't think we're strong mentally enough. But also, I don't think I could sit through us lumping the ball to Lastich for 90 minutes and hoping.
Well, it doesn't fit that branding that the club wanted in terms of that attacking football, that development. I just would be absolutely stunned to see him rock up at Pittodrie.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking internally within Scotland, for me, the only one that really stands out is Jens Bertolascu from Motherwell. I know that it took him some time to get that squad up and running and firing, but I think just on the premise of he might actually get our midfield playing like a midfield would be quite nice. Obviously, he's picked up some quite impressive wins this season, but I don't know. I just can't quite see him coming to us just for the position Motherwell's in, and also the fact that with the run that he's been on, he's probably got offers from elsewhere that are maybe slightly more appealing than ourselves at the minute. But again, I could pull names out the air. I could pull Gareth Southgate and Enzo Maresca out.
Funny, I've written, and I see only because I saw it in the comment earlier, but Enzo Maresca has previously been linked to the Aberdeen job before. Now, obviously, out with the job.
Yeah, I mean, I think going from Chelsea to Aberdeen would be a little bit of a culture shock. Going from Kensington to Tillydrone, not exactly ideal.
But he'd be straight into Rubus Law.
Exactly, right into the pure gym. But there's a few that Lutz might have some sort of connection with. I know that I've seen Marco Rose mentioned a few times. Again, whether he would deem that as a bit of a step down for himself when he most likely could get another job within the Bundesliga. Lutz obviously had the same sort of experience of potentially going there. So I think it all depends on his pitch, really. I mean, we could be shocked with who rocks up at Pittodrie. But yeah, again, I could pull names out the air. I think at the moment there's nothing I have any sort of insider knowledge on. But yeah.
Yeah, I know. Nothing that we say on here should be taken with more than an ounce of pinch of salt, please. You mentioned there Bertolascu's being the only domestic manager you would like to see. They've got impressive results this season. I totally agree, but there's another manager domestically that's got impressive results, including beating the old firm both home and away already. Is the Hearts manager worth a look? Please detect the sarcasm in that.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that would be probably the most Aberdeen thing, though, is to somehow get McInnes back. But yeah, like I say, I just can't see us getting anyone from inside of Scotland. I just don't think it fits, as you've already said, how the club have kind of branded themselves and sort of sold themselves to potential suitors before. But whether it is, like I say, somebody that any of us have heard of, or some mad German boy that's been coaching in the third division of Germany for the past 7 years, I think is yet to be seen.
Jando makes a good point on the Bertolascu rumours as well, linking it back to Jimmy Thelin, saying that Thelin truly shows that you can't judge a manager based on their first few months, maybe jumping the gun to suggest Ascu is the answer. Should we maybe wait and see how the whole season plays out? But I suppose likely if we did that, you missed the gun, because as I said on the last episode, I think clubs in England will more than monitoring him right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I say, I think he's more than likely got clubs that are after him, from down south or potentially abroad that can probably pitch a little bit better than we can with our current, obviously league position and the position that our playing squad finds itself in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, the social media rumors, let's call them, that have been doing the rounds. Uwe Rosler's name was mentioned, but I think he more recently took the Bochum job, so I don't see that being true. But one that was doing the rounds as well, and I noticed Adam G put in the comments as well, is Thorsten Fink. I don't know where that rumor comes from or that link to Lutz is generated from, but I think he's currently the manager at Genk. Well, when I did a quick Wikipedia search, that's where he was. So again, I think that, as you mentioned, throwing a lot of money towards a manager, but don't know how much we can risk throwing a lot of money at a risky appointment. I've seen someone also in the comments suggest Will Still as a risk appointment.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see, a manager that maybe feels like they've got a point to prove, that is, I suppose coming from somewhere that's higher caliber. Obviously the one that I had a joke about on the phone with my dad earlier was Ange Postecoglou. Has he maybe got a point to prove? Come back up to Scotland,
Scottish football.
Yeah, come back and got a point to prove, and show that it's not just the money that makes him a decent coach. He can actually get the best out of someone. Could be quite interesting. But I mean, you've got like a lot of like John Dal Thompson as well. Obviously played against Rangers with Malmo. Had a rundown obviously at Blackburn. I think was recently the Swedish manager as well. So whether we go back down that sort of Scandi route, but I can see
he had a horrible time as a Swedish manager.
He did a dreadful time. But I think up till then with Malmo, I think with Blackburn, he'd done relatively decent. But I think the bookie's favourite, if you were looking abroad, is probably going to be someone that's coached around Germany. You would assume, just with Lutz sort of leading the search.
Or, as you say, I know we don't want it, but potentially MLS managers, obviously given his connections over there as well. Chris Mainland saying Nancy might be available soon. Russell Martin, of course, still free. Fergie's not doing much these days. No, he keeps a tab on Aberdeen as well. And when he was most recently in Aberdeen for the Dennis Law Foundation dinner, Ruud van Nistelrooy came across with him. Of course, he's currently out of job as well. I've seen his name mentioned in the comments, along with Michael Carrick as well. But I suppose, given Ferguson connections, Darren Ferguson, will his name come up again?
God, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, like I said, again, it's I just don't know what way Lutz and Cormac really want to go with it. But it'll be interesting. I mean, I think we certainly need a manager that can, give a kick up the backside for a lot of these players. But yeah, I mean, as much as I'm sad that Jimmy is gone, I suppose it is somewhat exciting times, and it's sad that Callum's not here. Not only with it being the start of the transfer window to pull names of players out of a hat, but I'm sure he would also thoroughly enjoy pulling the names of managers out of a hat as well.
Yeah, exactly. And as Graham Gibbs also pointed out as well, there's the rumor again going around social media that Lutz has already identified the next manager, but the board were hoping that Jimmy Thelin would turn it round, which obviously he's not gone on to do. So it'll be interesting again to see how quickly that appointment is made. In terms of the Scottish connection, also previously played for us. I know Ryan Krill did that piece back in December, and he said he would love the opportunity to manage Aberdeen. As Rennie 88 points. Antoine Coumbare, come on down, league winning experience as well. So could that happen? Scottish Man Cave also suggesting David Wagner, previous manager of Huddersfield and Norwich, who's a German out of work. I guess a lot of people will make that connection to Germany and Lutz and see if that sticks or not. Dave Challoner is certainly a name that I wouldn't mind seeing linked with the job as well, from what he's done down south as well. Sean Maloney will probably get linked with the job again with that Aberdeen connection, given him being connected or doing well with the Belgian national team as well. But I think it's too risky to go for that young, untested and untried manager. You'd probably need a little bit of being around the block and has got some experience of actually instilling some fight into these players, because not only mentally, but I think a bit too physically weak at times we've seen from this squad.
Yeah, and I think just for their current position, that experience of, and resilience throughout a career is probably going to be something that the Football Monitoring Board are looking at. But I think, when you look at it on the flip side, I've already mentioned the word rebuild already. Whether the club have used this as a sort of clean slate rebuild and maybe getting in a younger manager, I suppose similar to Jimmy with a bit of a point to prove, it could be beneficial. So it'll be interesting. I think it'll be an interesting. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months until we get somebody in the door. And I am looking forward to doom scrolling Twitter most nights and frantically Googling random German and Scandinavian names to see where they've coached before.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see if the link does scan to Scandinavia and or if we avoid that market. I'm sure. I'm surprised nobody's mentioned Kjell Knutsen, the Bodo Glimt manager, yet in the comments. That's the biggest surprise. Probably final comment. I'll give it to Graham Gibb. When he said all he wants is what Cormac promised when he punted McInnes, attractive attacking football. I'm sure results thrown in there as well, Graham. Don't care who it is as long as they deliver that. Is that key for you as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think having a clear style and actually implementing that style week in, week out, I think allows everything else to somewhat fall into place and at least gives us something semi-enjoyable to watch on the pitch, which I think is half the battle.
Well, as we said about the last episode being called Apathetic Aberdeen, it's really getting that enjoyment factor in going back to Pittodrie. Of course, we're back there for the first time this calendar year at the weekend as Rangers come to town. Although this weather might have something to say about it as well. Actually, I'd be interested for that game on Tuesday. Probably not going to get an episode out on that, given the fact that Cormac Park is closed tomorrow. Hopefully, they've got the Sports Village booked out. But I'm really just interested to see kind of what reaction we get on Tuesday night. And I guess maybe Tuesday will give us a bit of an indication to how many of those players really had, I suppose if you want to call it in inverted commas, given up on Jimmy. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be interesting to see, whether the performance and the fight does up. If it does, I'm going to be heartily disappointed because, like you say, it just kind of reinforces what everyone's been thinking. There can be the argument that the game gets raised against Rangers. It's a, bloodthirsty match, whatever, etc., etc. But like I say, if you're only upping your performance once you've got a manager sack, then for me, that's entirely on the players and really would cause everyone to question their professionalism. But it'll be fun to maybe sit with binoculars out, those who are at Ibrox, to see if anyone's sitting beside. I would say Luke's in the director's box, but Cormac potentially or Burrows, whoever's in attendance at the director's box, see if anyone's getting sweet talked and wined and dined.
Yeah, or everyone will be keeping a keen eye on the Aberdeen arrivals for when flights aren't cancelled or delayed over the next few days to see who's maybe coming through the doors there. Or who's leaking any more stories to the Daily Record. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, kind of unexpected Sunday night podcast coming to be broken out and lots to have to be discussed. And I'm sure Phil will have lots more to discuss, obviously not just on the pitch, but off it throughout January, I'm sure, with incomings in terms of the managerial, but players and also outgoings as well. It's going to be a fun month, so strap in, folks.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy month already by the sounds of it. 4 days in and a sacked manager and a whole transfer window to look forward to. Can't wait.
Yeah, exactly. Can't wait. So if you don't want to miss an episode, subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much to everyone who's done so over the last few days. We've finally reached that 2,500 subscriber mark. So big achievement for us on the podcast as well. Subscribe and follow on audio platforms as well. They're all free to do. And we really thank you all for the support being shown. Until next time, we'll catch you on Red Tinted Glasses.